Okay, so the short series, I decided to do it in three sections so that it wouldn't be too long in each section. But the title of it, I'm calling The Battlefield of Consciousness. And I just want to say that I first learned that term back in 1972 when I was, I think, 18 years old. And I was studying with the Maharishi, Mahesh Yogi. And we were studying the Mahabharata, which is where the Bhagavad Gita comes from. So in the Far East, the Vedas are this all of these books that it's not just one book, and the Bhagavad Gita and the Mahabharata, the Upanishads, Rig Veda, Samaveda, Ayurveda, which you've probably all heard of. So there's lots of books, but the Mahabharata is pretty famous because of the Bhagavad Gita, right? And the Bhagavad Gita is like a big war. And it's kind of crazy. It's, as you read through it, most of the stuff that's published is just a few chapters of it. But as you read through the whole Mahabharata, it's sort of like, when is this war going to end? And what is it? What's the purpose of it all, right? And Maharishi explained to us that it really is about the battlefield of consciousness. And that's the first time I heard that term, the battlefield of consciousness. And he's saying it's not that these wars actually happened, it's an instruction. So each phase of the war is an instruction to us about our own war, which is the battlefield of consciousness, right? And then I learned from my teacher, my Kabbalistic teacher, very similar uh, sort of theosophical idea that these wars in the Torah weren't really actually wars, but allegory and instruction for us to learn about the battlefield of consciousness. And then as I began to study the Zohar, I saw that the Zohar talks about this supernal war in the world of what's called Arnon. And it became clear to me that there was a thread, a very common thread here from my early days with the Maharishi through the Zohar teaching itself. And as I've gotten older, I found that not having that information, or at least that perspective, uh, can be very damaging because I see it happening where people look perhaps at the Torah, let's say, and see some wars going on and wars commanded by God, and God commanded that all of these people and their children and their mothers and their animals should be killed. And it's like, whoa, what's going on here? Carlos Suarez talks a little bit about it in the Cipher of Genesis, where he talks about the strange sort of hypocrisy of um, Moses coming down from the mountain and God wanting to kill all of the Hebrews who were worshiping a false idol. So if you take a sort of a realism or a rationalist approach to the Torah and you read all those stories, and that's not the only one, and you look at it with any kind of clarity, you conclude that this is really a strange, narcissistic God, right? Because how could you conclude otherwise? It's in, there's all of these commandments, and the contradiction, of course, is thou shalt not kill, right? So that's in the Torah. It's a holy commandment not to kill, but then you're commanded to kill, like Joshua was commanded to kill. All of these commandments to people, and there's these things going on. But if you look at that and say, that's just a story or an allegory of instruction to us about this thing that I'm calling the battlefield of consciousness, then you can look at it in a totally different light, right? And say, what does this war, what does this story have to tell us? And the beauty of it is each one of these stories in the Torah has, once you learn them from a what I'll call Kabbalistic or mystical point of view, you see that even the numerology and the gematria and the letters and the names tell us more about ourselves than a historical event. So I'm not telling you what to believe. I would never do that. I'm not saying these things never happened. It's quite possible they never happened, or it's quite possible they happened. But what's the point of them? The point of them is Torah means instruction, right? So the point of them is to give us some instruction on our Shloshim V'Shtayim, 32 paths of higher consciousness. That's the only purpose they could possibly serve. I can't think of another one. If anyone can, I'm happy if you chime in. And what's terribly destructive at this point is when you look at it like this is a war and God likes to kill people that don't do what he says, you start to believe it, and then you start to sort of adapt a sense of triumphalism. This is a word that I never knew existed, and I was listening to Rabbi Zalman talking about it. And basically what it means is that, you know, our religion is better than other religions, or our government is better than the other government. And it becomes an extreme, and then we have wars for real. So what I want to do in this short series, just a little, give you a little taste of what I was taught and what I think is pretty evident in the Zohar teaching. So I'm going to start off with the story of Jacob in Torah. Because I believe when he wrestles with this man or this angel or this God, that this story is really sort of the architect, the platform from which we can understand this concept of the battlefield of consciousness. So I'm going to read Genesis 32:22. I'm going to start off by saying I don't think it's an accident that it's chapter 32 from verse 22 on. Okay, so we know from the Sefer Yetzirah, what do we know? Shoshim V'Shtayim Netivot Pliot Chachma, 32 paths, mystical paths of wisdom. And here we are in the 32nd chapter of Genesis. And of course, the central part of those 32 paths are the 22 letters. So I'll begin by reading chapter 32 of Genesis, starting with the 22nd verse, if I can find it here. Hold on a second. Okay, verse 22. So the present passed over before him, and he himself lodged that night in the camp. He's talking about Jacob. And he rose up that night and took his wives and his handmaids and his 11 children and passed over the ford of Jabbok. Jabbok, it's spelled, hold on, I'll find it here in the Hebrew, Yud Bet Kuf. Now, Jabbok, the ford of Jabbok, has interesting meaning to it. I'll just read that. A place of passing over, struggle, to empty, to pour out. Okay. And Jacob was then alone, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. Now, if you look at the Hebrew where it says a man, it's Ish, which is spelled Aleph, Yud, Shin. Just want to look at that a little bit deeper, just for a moment. We say that, of course, Aleph is representative of that unified field of pure consciousness that we call Ein Sof, right? And Yud is that sort of catalytic energy producer that moves that pure silence into the world of creation and formation and action. And Shin is interesting because Shin represents that Binah, that sort of left column energy that starts with Binah, and if you move down, Gevorah, and so forth, right? So what we have in man, and this man that Jacob wrestled, was this Aleph, pure energy, unified field consciousness, moving, and it's moving in a way of the Shin energy. So the Shin energy now to us is this understanding of that left column, that Binah, understanding energy, where we sort of thrash things out. That's where we wrestle with things. So Hakmah on the right side is an experience of that pure consciousness, an experience of the Aleph. We surrender in that state. And then when we move along to Binah, that's where we thrash things out. That's sort of our hitbonen category, our mindfulness. Whereas that energy of the Chachma is sort of mindlessness, just pure consciousness. And it expresses itself and we experience it. And then we move to Binah where we have an understanding, we wrestle with it, so to speak. So it all makes sense from that point of view. Okay. Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled with a man with him until the breaking of the day. And when he saw that he prevailed not against him, this is the angel, he saw that he prevailed not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh, and the hollow of Jacob's thigh was strained as he wrestled with him. And he said, "Let me go, for the day breaketh." And he said, meaning Jacob, "I will not let thee go, except if you bless me." And he said to him, meaning the angel, "What is thy name?" And Jacob said, "Jacob." The angel said, "Thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Yisrael, for thou hast striven with God and with men and hast prevailed." Okay, so if we just take it from there, we see this experience, right? I'm going to get out of this so I can see you guys again. Okay, there you are. So we have Jacob. He's getting ready, he knows, to meet Esau. From a Kabbalistic perspective, this is all about opposites. And this is all about the understanding of these various energies and how they unite. So the first thing that comes to mind is that he takes his family and he puts them on the other side of this river. We understand that the name of the river tells us something, right? To empty, to be empty, to struggle and empty. So in that first, if we were to look at Hakmah, we have an emptying out of letting go of our narratives, our structures, and an experience of Ein Sof within us, the well within us. And then Jacob goes and he is by himself when he has that experience. It's a critical point, right? No one else can have that experience for you. He's not sitting with his wives and his children and his rabbis and asking them to be the arbiter of his life and what he should do and what he shouldn't do and what's kosher and what's not kosher. He goes by himself to wrestle. And the battlefield of consciousness takes place inside. So very often the Sefer Yetzirah will refer to angels as transcendent beings within us. Not necessary. It isn't necessary that we have to look at this like, oh, to be like Jacob, I expect some angel to walk in my room tonight, in my bedroom, and we have a wrestling match, right? So this battlefield of consciousness is in what we call the inner court. So there's this dialogue between Jacob, and then let me say this, who Jacob is wrestling with, and I told you in the Torah itself, it says Ish, but he goes on further in the dialogue to describe this as he's wrestled with God and prevailed. So there's theories, different theories. One is that it's actually God he's wrestling with. One, it's an angel of God. Another, it's an angel of Esau. Another, it's his angel. Right? None of that matters. So at this point, we're talking about a battlefield of consciousness. So what I'm trying to say is this is sort of the architecture for any other battle. And it shows us what really happens. So we have this first experience of emptying the cup, experiencing Hakma consciousness. But then where the real wrestling match comes is when we're in our hitbonen or in our lives or even in our inner court where we're having this intellectual, emotional battle. And we've all had it from time to time. It's all a part of our lives. And as such, it's good to get the instruction from the Torah because it enables us to say, hey, you know what? What would Jacob do? How did this work out for him? So let's take the story further. So now we have the dislocation of the hip. So there's a lot of theories on that. The one I like the most is the one of fight or flight. So the angel is wrestling with him, and he's having this internal wrestling match, Jacob. The thigh is basically also metaphor, and it enables him not to be someone who runs away from this battle. Because he's shown already in his life that he likes to escape things. So this hip thing is just to tell us, hey, you don't want to run away from any of these things that confront us. We want to take the battle. We want to do the battle. And Jacob was put in that position where he was not going to be able to flee from this. So, and he embraced it. So, that's a lesson in and of itself, right? So they do this battle all night long. I would imagine that everyone on this Zoom call has experienced this in their lives. Because you're here, you're meditators, you're here with spiritual goals and ideals, and you want to cross borders of higher consciousness. So you've wrestled with things in your life, your own narratives that were put inside you from religious leaders and so on and so forth, or parents or this or that, structures that you wanted to break down, right? These are internal things that cause us to not be able to have higher consciousness. So we fight with them. And sometimes we try to escape them. We think, oh, I feel this way. I feel this way about Bob, and I join his Zoom, but I don't like the way he looks, and I don't like some of his jokes are so stupid, or I don't like his politics. And so you're wrestling with this thing, and I don't know what you come up with, but sometimes it's better to say, I don't even want to think about that. I think I'll have a drink of wine, or I'll have a gummy or something. And it'll put me in a state of mind where I don't have to think about Bob anymore. And that's a stupid example, but it could be your wife or your kid or some war going on in the world. And the lesson, part of this lesson is we can't run away from these things if we want to experience higher consciousness in this battlefield of consciousness. The result is he's blessed. And the result is he's blessed with this title, Israel, right? And we call ourselves the children of Yisrael, right? But if we look at how Yisrael is spelled with the Yud, the Shin, the Resh, the Aleph, and the Lamed, then we can look at the energy of what he's blessed with, because this wrestling match he has with Binah, this thrashing out of things, allows him to reconnect with the Aleph, and the Lamed is this great connector of the above and below. Right? So if you look at those letters, based on what we've been teaching for years and years here, you'll see that this title that he's been given is an actual experience of higher consciousness, right? And that's what Yisrael, the children of Israel, that's what it is. If you're not having a wrestling match, if you're not wrestling, if you're not in that war, the battlefield of consciousness, then we have no right to claim that title. And please don't misunderstand me. I don't believe in any kind of, what they call replacement theory. I hate it. I'm just saying that we don't have the grip, the hold on that angel and that blessing, because it's about the movement of that energy. So then what happens? The result is Esau comes along. He goes to meet Esau. He bows down to Esau 7 times before he hugs him and weeps. Right? 7 is not an arbitrary number. We talk about the 7 doubles being representative of the inner court within us, the holy inner court. So there's the Holy of Holies, then the inner court, and then the outer court, which is the world of action. So he goes through this experience where before there was all fear and anger on either side. Now Jacob and Esau are united. Well, how are they united? They're united in this heartfelt crying between the two of them. It's not an intellectual exercise at that point. They're not arguing, oh, you stole my birthright. Oh, no, it was my birthright. There's none of that going on. It's just bowing down. The heart surrenders, and this experience happens. So Jacob, the battlefield of consciousness, all of these things happen. And that's the result. And if you look at Jacob and Esau, right side, left side, feminine, masculine, this is a beautiful story about how these things come together, and there's a unity that transcends diversity. I'm sure that hugging and loving didn't constitute they both thought the same thing now about all things. I'm sure that's not the case. And further on, it proves it's not the case. But there was this experience of Jacob, his experience of the unity of left and right, and him being able to experience that in the inner court and in the world of action with Esau. So whenever we look at all of these struggles in the Torah, and then God says, kill this one, kill that one, we have to look deeper. And one of the most famous people, well, 2, that I'm going to talk about in the next 2 lessons that did this was Rabbi Akiva, and then one of his disciples, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So that will be the next 2 lessons. Next week, I'll talk about Akiva and how this relates to him and what he did. Started out as a shepherd, a poor boy shepherd, uncertain of his heritage. Some people think his parents converted. Some people think that he wasn't even a Jew when he started out. He became the most revered rabbi and sage in Jewish history. And his disciple was Shimon Bar Yochai, who penned or authored the Zohar. And this deeper look. But I think it's important to understand, because we don't want to become people who look at these wars and justify killing and slaughtering of people who don't think like us. And we become triumphalists. Like Rabbi Zalman says, that's a road that leads to nowhere.